I just wanted to ask about the Prime Minister's trip to China in April this year, in which it was reported that he had a private meeting with the Chinese President in order to brief him in part, presumably there were lots of matters they raised, but in part in relation to the search for MH370. So I just wanted to ask if you can confirm that the Prime Minister did have a private meeting with the Chinese President on April the 11th this year, how long that meeting went for, what time of the day it was, whether MH370 was discussed, and we can maybe start with that.
Senator, I'll ask Peter Rowe to add if there is anything to add. Yes, it is the case that the Prime Minister made a visit to China in April, and he did meet with President Xi Jinping. I don't know if I'd characterise the meeting as a private meeting. It was, I think, an official meeting. My understanding is that the Prime Minister did take the opportunity of that meeting to brief President Xi on developments in relation to MH370, which of course was an issue of very high interest to the Chinese leadership. I don't have the date of the meeting, but I'm sure we can get that.
Peter Rowe, First Assistant Secretary, North Asia Division. Offhand, now I can't remember what the actual date was. It was towards the end of the visit.
Okay, well, it was, according to the reports, it was April the 11th, and I just want if you can confirm that that took place and also what time that meeting took place. Can you tell me were there any officials present at that meeting?
Well, as the Secretary said, it wasn't a private meeting so much as an official meeting, and private in the sense that there wouldn't have been any the only relevant people would have been there on both sides, including the ambassador and various of the Prime Minister's advisors.
Okay. Well, if you would mind providing a list of who was there in support of the Prime Minister or on the Australian side of the meeting, if you like. And can you tell me who prepared the brief for the Prime Minister for that meeting and also for the speech that he made in China on April 11th?
Senator Milne, can I just make one observation, which is I think questions relating to the Prime Minister's travel ought to be directed to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and it is not our practice to release details of conversations between heads of government, or indeed to release details of participants in discussions with other heads of government.
Yes, I can appreciate that, but I have asked the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet who provided the briefing to the Prime Minister in relation to the details of MH370, and they said that they didn't. So somebody obviously did, and I'm trying to establish whether DFAT provided the briefing to the Prime Minister on the details of MH370 on the basis of which he then briefed President Xi Jinping.
Well, I'm happy to take on notice whether or not DFAT provided separate briefing to the Prime Minister for that meeting on MH370.
Thank you. If you would be able to establish for me whether it was DFAT who briefed the Prime Minister on the details, would you be able to indicate whether that briefing was prepared in consultation with the chair or members of the joint coordinating group here in Australia, which was headed up by Angus Houston? So I would like to know if he was consulted in the briefing, and also to know what critical detailed analysis of the information was conducted before the Prime Minister told the President of China that we've narrowed the search area and we're very confident the signals are from the black box. So can anyone shed any light on how the Prime Minister came to make that statement in China?
Well, Senator Milne, perhaps I can be of assistance. First of all, most of what you have asked is, as Mr Varghese has pointed out, best asked of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to the extent to which it's a proper question. Secondly, much of the information that you've identified in your question would appear to me to go to the content of advice to ministers, in this case the Prime Minister, and as you ought to know, is not allowable. We'll take the question on notice and we'll respond to that much of it as is A, relevant, and B, permissible.
Well, it would surely, Minister, given that our Prime Minister told the President of China in a country where about 154 of the people who died in MH370 were Chinese citizens, that he ought to have had a substantial reason for telling the Chinese President that we're confident the signals are from the black box. And I'm trying to establish who provided the Prime Minister with that briefing and whether the Joint Task Force had been consulted before he made that statement.
Well, Senator Milne, your state of mind and the reasons you are asking the questions you are asking or making the statements you are making is really of no interest to me. I've told you we'll take the question on notice and we will respond to that part of it that is A, relevant to this committee, and B, permissible.
Thanks, Senator Milne.
No, I haven't. I wanted to go to another matter now, if I can, Chair.
Yes, of course.
Thank you. The second thing I wanted to raise was in relation to the issue of the ISIL terrorism that's going on in the Middle East. And so I wanted to ask, has the government met with officials from Kuwait or Qatar in relation to implementing strong anti-money laundering or counter-terrorism financing regimes? Have we actually met with officials from either of those countries in relation to that matter?
I don't know whether our ambassador for counter-terrorism is in the room, and if he's not, Senator, I'll take the question on notice. We regularly discuss counter-terrorism issues with governments across the world, but including in the Middle East. But whether we've had detailed discussions in relation specifically to the question you raise, I'll see whether Mr Armitage is in a position to respond to that.
Thanks very much, Senator. Miles Armitage, Ambassador for Counter-Terrorism. As the Secretary said, we have had discussions with the countries in the region. In terms of the precise details in relation to Kuwait and Qatar, I'd need to take that on notice. But our general representations to the countries in the region have obviously covered the question of support to ISIL in all its various forms, and obviously in implementing the UN resolutions, particularly 2170 and 2178, which impose obligations on member states to disrupt and prevent sources of funding to ISIL. We've obviously raised that with the countries in the region.
So I can assume from your answer we have raised it with both Kuwait and Qatar.
I will need to check on both those countries.
Okay, and given that the United States has now sanctioned a number of Qatari and Kuwaiti nationals and also NGOs in recent months for their role in providing cash and arms to terror groups associated with ISIL, has the Australian government done the same? Have we actually sanctioned any Qatari or Kuwaiti nationals and NGOs in relation to that? Are there any sanctions currently in place?
Senator, I think we'd have to take that on notice. I mean, obviously, if any of those are listed under the Sanctions Committee of the Security Council, we would, as we're obliged to, impose sanctions. Whether we've done so and if we've gone further than that, I'd have to take on notice.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, and also can you tell me if it's under active consideration, or are you saying that it is a matter of course, it's just a matter of identifying them?
Well, if it's a decision of the Sanctions Committee, we would do it as a matter of course. I mean, we would execute that decision as we're obliged to. We do have a capacity to impose additional sanctions, yes, and that would depend on the evidentiary basis for it. And
I guess what I'm asking, is there any active consideration of that? Is there any investigation?
I'll have to take that on notice.
Take that on notice, okay.
Thanks,
the other
Milne.
thing, other thing in relation to the same question,
yes,
is that obviously one of the other things that various countries are trying to do is choke off oil sales and sales of refined petroleum, because obviously that's where a lot of the money is coming from to those groups. Has Australia done anything in that regard with regard to maybe notifying Australian business or importers of taking particular care to source or to follow the source of where these products are coming from?
Again,
no, I think
we'll have to take that on notice, yeah.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.